The newly added major insignia on my shoulder flashed coldly under the spotlight in the auditorium. I raised my hand in salute, and the auditorium erupted in applause, though my face showed no extra emotion. After the promotion ceremony ended, I turned around and walked straight down the stage amid my peers' gazes. I didn't attend the subsequent victory banquet, instead driving straight back to the single-officer apartment assigned to me at the military district. Pushing open the apartment's anti-theft door, the air inside carried a dry, dusty scent of long absence. I took off my major's formal uniform cap and placed it neatly on the shoe cabinet by the entrance, then headed into the cloakroom to change into combat gear. The moment I opened the cloakroom drawer, my gaze froze. Inside the drawer lay my military multifunctional combat knife, and beneath the knife, sealed tightly under it, was an unaddressed, pure black envelope with no postage stamp. I didn't reach for it right away. I pulled a pair of anti-static rubber gloves from my tactical vest, slipped them on, then gently pinched the envelope's edge to extract it. Opening the envelope, only a single sheet of A4 paper printed with a color printer remained, an overhead aerial photo, extremely clear, with details sharp enough to make out the clothes drying in the yard. It was my parents' old house in the suburban outskirts of the city. On the second floor master bedroom's location, someone had circled the area thickly in red marker. Beside the circle was written, "Congratulations on your promotion, Major, but the higher you fly, the harder you fall. Do you think your two defenseless parents can withstand the gravity of a terrible fall?" I stared at those words. 2 seconds later, I folded the paper and placed it into a physical evidence bag. There was neither anger nor panic on my face. I immediately approached my desk, opened my military-grade encrypted laptop, and swiftly tapped on the keyboard to retrieve surveillance footage from the corridor outside my officer's apartment. Rapid playback began. The video froze at 2:00 p.m. yesterday. A man wearing the apartment property cleaner's uniform, donning a baseball cap and surgical mask, used a master key to open my door. He stayed inside for just 3 minutes and exited empty-handed. I took a screenshot of the man's face and sent it directly to the technical section of the military district's security office. Find this man. I want his entire profile and location within 30 minutes. After sending, I opened the wardrobe, removed a portable wireless surveillance set and a military high-precision anti-wiretapping detector, packed them in my tactical backpack, changed into neat black civilian clothes, and put on my baseball cap. Rather than exit through the main apartment entrance, I used a safety passageway, avoiding lobby surveillance, descending directly to the underground parking garage. I opened the door of my off-road vehicle, started the engine. Tires screeched sharply against the garage floor as the vehicle roared out of the parking facility like a steel beast, racing toward my parents' old house in the suburban outskirts. Half an hour later, the off-road vehicle halted under the shadow of trees outside the old house. I turned off the car lights, bypassing the front gates, and effortlessly vaulted over the tumtor-high outer wall with one hand, gently landing at the yard's perimeter silent upon impact. I pulled my anti-wiretapping detector, propped open the rear door on the first floor of the old residence. The detector emitted a faint green glow in the dark. I conducted checks along the foyer, living room, and dining room. Upon reaching the door to my parents' master bedroom on the second floor, the green light instantly turned painfully crimson, accompanied by a faint vibration. The signal source was inside the base of the bedside lamp. I approached, flipped the lamp over, and discovered a tiny pinhole camera and miniature bug in the crevice. Subsequently, in gaps between bookshelves in the study and above the living room's chandelier, I found 4 additional tracking devices of similar kind. Looking at the 4 bug detectors glowing faintly red in my palm, my expression remained calm. I didn't destroy them immediately. I pulled out from my backpack my own military-grade encrypted concealed camera. The cameras were as small as mung beans, operating on military-grade anti-interference frequencies that no civilian detection equipment on the market could pick up. I installed these hidden cameras at the main entrance of the old house, above the living room, above the master bedroom door, and at the entrance to the basement. After installation, I sat in the shadows on the second floor and connected my phone to the newly set up military surveillance terminal. Instantly, clear, full coverage monitoring footage appeared on the screen. Having completed everything, I returned the 4 wiretaps I had uncovered back to their original positions. I stood up, brushed dust off my hands, pulled out my phone, and dialed the technical department of the security office. Reporting, Major, came the clear voice of the technical officer on the other end. We've confirmed the cleaner's identity. His name is Scout. He has prior theft convictions and was temporarily hired 3 days ago by a subsidiary called Peak Real Estate, based on his cell phone's signal tracking. He is currently at an upscale billiard hall in the city center. Peak Real Estate. I repeated the name softly, a cold glint flashing in my eyes. Continue monitoring his location. Don't alert him, I instructed over the phone. Also, check whether Peak Real Estate has had any recent financial dealings with Julian. Yes. Understood. I ended the call, put my phone back into my pocket, and descended the stairs. The old house was now silent enough for a needle to drop. I opened the front door, the night breeze swaying the edges of my coat. I turned, locked the door behind me, and strode confidently toward the off-road vehicle parked beneath the trees. The long rosewood dining table was laden with sumptuous dishes, while silverware shimmered coldly under the chandelier's crystal glow. My father and mother sat at the head of the table, their expressions gentle but shadows of fatigue around their eyes betraying the imminent journey. I sat at the side, already changed from casual wear into a well-tailored dark shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal a taut arm bearing a faint scar. Knock, knock, knock. A crisp knock interrupted the tranquility of the table. Before the housekeeper could reach the door, it swung open. Uncle, Auntie, I heard you're flying abroad early tomorrow. As your nephew, I must come and see you off, Julian said, stepping into the dining room in a tailored custom suit, his face wearing a familiar, slightly obsequious smile. Behind him followed his mother Victoria, whom I've always found haughty, carrying 2 elegant gift boxes. Instantly upon entering, her eyes darted across the living room and the staircase on the second floor. Julian, tonight's just a casual family meal. We didn't prepare anything for you. I didn't stand up, instead calmly stirring the soup in front of me with a white porcelain spoon, the metallic clink against ceramic unrelenting. Oh, stop it, little sister, Victoria said with a smile, approaching and placing the gift boxes on a nearby cabinet beside her. She pulled out a chair and sat down easily. We're family anyway, just a few extra chopsticks. Besides, Julian's now the deputy general manager of Ascension Real Estate. He's usually too busy to even touch the ground. Today he especially managed time to visit you. Hearing the name Ascension Real Estate, my fingers holding the spoon paused for a fraction of a second before releasing. I raised my head and locked eyes with Julian. A flicker of momentary panic flashed in his expression, quickly masked by his insincere grin. Uncle. Julian ignored me, addressing my father directly instead. He took out a document from his briefcase and handed it over with both hands. I heard you and Auntie are relocating overseas for some time. Look here, those 15% of old family shares you hold would be wasted if no one manages them back home. I just happen to have a major project at hand. If we use these shares as collateral, Ascension Real Estate can take its business to the next level. You'd get a generous share of the profits later. My father didn't accept the document, only furrowing his brow slightly before sipping his tea. Julian, I've already made it clear about the shares. These are meant to be left to me. I cut in, shifting slightly forward with my hands interlocked on the table, smirking. Cousin, Ascension Real Estate has been moving quite stealthily lately, but according to my sources, your company is implicated in illegal development on military-adjacent land. Your capital chain has already collapsed, and you're now facing total liquidation from the banks. Julian's face darkened instantly. He shot to his feet, raising his voice. What nonsense are you spouting? You're just a soldier, how would you know anything about business? Ascension Real Estate has over $1 billion in assets. How could it possibly collapse? I don't understand business, I said calmly, pulling a stack of printed A4 sheets from my pocket and sliding them smoothly across the table until they landed precisely in front of Julian. But I understand law and I understand numbers. They were a bank-loaded account statement stamped with official seal, along with copies of internal audit reports on a project. This details how half a month ago, under the pretense of funding turnover, you privately diverted $30 million from Ascension Real Estate's public funds, after being laundered through 3 shell companies. This money ultimately ended up in your personal offshore account. I stared at Julian, my voice without a hint of inflection, yet cold as a blade in an ice chamber. Julian, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds. Guess what would happen if I sent these straight to the board of Peak Real Estate? Or handed them directly to the Economic Investigation Division? Would you be able to walk out that door tonight? Cold sweat instantly broke out across Julian's forehead. He fixed his eyes on the documents before him, his palms trembling slightly, reaching forward reflexively. My right hand gently pressed down on the table surface. A multipurpose combat knife snicked out, instantly piercing through the stack of documents, the blade embedding itself firmly into the mahogany dining table, the hilt still vibrating slightly. Julian's hand froze midair, mere 2 centimeters from the blade tip. What are you doing? That's illegal, Victoria screamed, leaping up, her face pale. In this household, bringing forged project proposals to deceive my parents' pension money, that's what's illegal. I withdrew the knife, casually rotated it between my fingers, then tucked it back into my waistband. Julian, grab your things and get out right now. Julian glared at me, grinding his teeth, eyes filled with venom and resentment. He grabbed the pierced documents from the table, grabbed his mother, and hurriedly headed toward the entrance. At the foyer, Julian paused, turned back, and said to me in a low, vicious whisper, "Don't celebrate too soon. You might be able to protect them now, but you can't protect them forever. We'll see each other again. No problem at all. I'll be waiting." I leaned back in the chair, coldly watching him slam the door shut. Silence returned to the dining area. I turned toward the maid and whispered, "Clara, go lock the front door. Don't open it for anyone tonight." Then, I pulled out my phone and glanced at the encrypted message from the Military Region Security Division just received. "Scout is under surveillance. Half an hour ago." He spoke on the phone with Julian's secretary. It was already 11 o'clock at night when I left my parents' house. The SUV cut through the darkness, racing along the highway back to the Special Operations Base. I ended my call with the base duty room. That night, a batch of consignment materials for interregional drills had arrived urgently and needed to be inspected and signed in on-site. As the overseeing officer, I had to be there in person. Half an hour later, the vehicle entered the reserve warehouse zone on the outskirts of the military district. This area was adjacent to the base's back gate, surrounded by large poplar forests. Since it wasn't part of the core zone, only a few dim streetlights flickered in the night wind, casting mottled shadows across the ground. I parked the SUV in an open space outside the warehouse, turned off the engine, and pulled out the car keys. The warehouse gate was firmly closed. The transportation company team responsible for handover would arrive in 15 minutes. The surroundings were unusually quiet. Eerie, in fact. Only the faint rustle of leaves could be heard. I pushed open the car door and stepped down. The moment I shut the door behind me, my ears twitched slightly, capturing the gentle shuffling sound of dress shoes stepping on gravel. The sound came from the forest directly behind me, at the 3 o'clock position. I didn't turn around. Instead, I pulled up the zipper of my tactical jacket and plunged my right hand into my pocket, gripping the military-grade voice recorder concealed there. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps no longer attempted concealment. Growing urgent, 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the forest in a triangular formation, each clutching a thick steel pipe reflecting a cold gleam under the dim lamplight. I clearly recognized the lead man, that familiar janitor from the military district apartments who'd been bribed and disguised. Scout. The other two were burly, massively muscled, their eyes filled with the vicious cruelty typical of street toughs. Major. It's not exactly safe for you wandering about by yourself in the middle of the night. Scout rolled his pipe in one hand, his smile tight and fake. Boss Julian sent me to give you a friendly message. Don't push people too hard. You've got enemies you can't afford to anger. Hand over the original ledger from that table. And get your dad to sign the equity agreement. Then everything will be fine. Otherwise, with that. He slammed the pipe hard onto his own thigh, echoing with a dull thud. Otherwise what? I turned around, my back against the SUV's door, hands stuffed casually into my pockets, speaking in a voice as calm as if discussing the weather. Otherwise, these hands that hold a weapon tonight might just get crippled here. Even if the military investigates, it'll only be written off as a common public disturbance. Our guys here will get a couple of years in prison. But your future, he gave a cruel grin, that'll be utterly destroyed. The thug beside Scout sneered and stepped forward, raising the pipe high before smashing it down toward my shoulder. A sharp whoosh filled the air. I stood still, only shifting my body slightly when the steel pipe was a mere 10 centimeters from my shoulder. The pipe grazed past the hem of my jacket, missing completely. Momentum carried the thug forward. Instantly, my right hand shot from my pocket, transforming palm into knife, striking precisely at the carotid sinus on the side of his neck. Thud. A dull impact. The huge man didn't even have a chance to scream. His eyes rolled back. Then his massive body collapsed like a fallen wall, crashing face first into the gravel ground. Immediately knocked unconscious. This guy's trouble. Take him all together. Scout shouted, eyes widening in panic. The second thug, seeing his companion instantly downed, his eyes exploding with murderous intent, he wrenched both hands around the pipe, slashing hard toward my head with full force, clearly intending to break me on the spot. Instead of retreating, I stepped forward to meet him, instantly closing the distance. Before the pipe could strike me, my left hand snared his wrist with precision, bent it forcefully downward while my right knee simultaneously surged up like a hurricane wind, ramming hard into his lower abdomen. Crack! The sound of the broken wrist echoed simultaneously with gurgling retching from the impact. The steel pipe dropped from his frozen hands. The man twisted upward like a shrimp, doubled over in agony. I smoothly launched a kick to knock him flat on the ground, clutching his stomach with pain. He writhed violently but couldn't get up again. From the moment I moved to both of them hitting the ground, the whole process took no more than 10 seconds. Scout was completely petrified. The steel pipe in his hand clattered to the ground, his face as pale as a sheet of paper under the streetlight. He turned and tried to run into the woods. I pulled off the tactical harness around my waist, lunged forward like a cheetah, caught up in 3 strides, grabbed him by the back collar, and yanked him violently backward. Scout lost his balance and fell heavily to the ground. Before he could scream, my knee had already pressed tightly into his lower back, twisting his hands behind his back and securing them completely with the harness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a voice recorder, pressing the stop button. Their threats and the employer's name had already been recorded verbatim. Next, I began conducting a flip search on Scout. I rudely tore off his coat and took out a ciphered mobile phone kept only with one number saved, along with a thick stack of cash from his inner pocket. I waved the phone in front of Scout's eyes. Payment from Julian as an informer fee, or a deposit to have someone attacked. I don't know. Julian told me to do all this. He said we were only supposed to scare you. Scout trembled all over in pain, his voice choked with sobs. I didn't waste any words, pulling out my phone and directly dialing the contact of the chief of the Criminal Investigation Division at the police station. Old classmate. This is outside the military zone's reserve warehouse. 3 individuals are suspected of assaulting active duty soldiers with weapons, attempting to steal classified military materials. I've already subdued them. Bring your team here to take custody. Hanging up the call, The headlights of the transport company's convoy had already begun shining at the far end of the woods. At 5:30 in the morning, the horizon had just begun to warm with the faint glow of dawn. The VIP lounge of the international airport was chilled by air conditioning, with a few scattered travelers quietly reading newspapers. Standing rigidly beside my parents, I held their suitcase in my right hand, scanning every entrance in the hall. Though I hadn't slept at all last night, there was not the slightest trace of fatigue on my face. Dad, Mom, your boarding passes are ready. Boarding begins in half an hour. I handed them over, my voice steady. My mother gently patted the back of my hand, her eyes filled with worry. Child, about last night. Julian and his people won't let this go easily. How about we don't leave and stay in the country to be with you? The tickets were booked half a month ago. The overseas recuperation schedule can't be delayed. As for what's happening at home, I slightly raised my chin, my gaze resolute. Leave it to me. You can rest assured. Tap tap tap. Suddenly, a sharp applause broke out at the lounge entrance. I turned. Victoria was marching toward us, surrounded by a group of impeccably dressed lawyers. She wore an exclusive black haute couture suit today, accentuated with elegant yet harsh makeup, and her eyes gleamed with the manic determination of victory. Behind her, two burly bodyguards flanked her on either side, their expressions cold. Leaving, after going through all that trouble to mess up our Julian family. You think you can just split the scene and head overseas? Victoria stopped 3 steps away, sneering. She signaled to the lawyers beside her. The lead lawyer, wearing glasses, stepped forward immediately, pulling out a thick stack of documents from his briefcase. Speaking in a detached official tone, he said, Mr. Gu, Mrs. Gu. We represent Mr. Julian as well as the board of Dingsheng Real Estate. Served upon you the following: the emergency amendment agreement for the family trust and the application for seizure of assets pending litigation. Due to Mr. Gu's alleged violent assault on a Dingsheng employee last night, and also suspected misuse of military status for unfair business competition, Dingsheng Real Estate has formally filed a lawsuit with the court. During the litigation, all family trusts and equity under your names must sign immediately to freeze the assets and cooperate with investigation. Otherwise, airport security will intercept you immediately. Sign. I took a step forward, shielding my parents behind me, my eyes slashing across the lawyer's face, with an unilaterally submitted application that doesn't even bear an official seal. You want to restrict this citizen's freedom at an international airport. Did you buy your law degrees from street vendors? Major Gu, we have the full set of filed lawsuit procedures. You can refuse to sign, but today your parents absolutely won't step past this boarding gate. Victoria snarled at me, her voice sharp. Last night, you got Julian arrested by the police. Today, I'll make sure your parents suffer embarrassment right here at the airport. Just sign this agreement, hand over the equity, and I guarantee their safe departure. Otherwise, she hadn't finished speaking when I pulled out my phone, dialed a number publicly in front of everyone, and pressed the speaker button. The call connected instantly. A stern, composed voice came through. Major Gu, the second detachment of the Provincial Economic Investigation Team is in place. Please provide instruction. Officer Vincent, I announced, turning to fully face the stunned lawyer and the onlookers. The opposing legal team is currently in the VIP lounge of the airport presenting my parents with a document titled Emergency Amendment Agreement for the Family Trust. They are suspected of forging official documents, intimidation, and illegally occupying lawful personal property. Understood. We've already retrieved examination records for Dingsheng Real Estate's financial transactions this morning along with their so-called lawsuit filings. After investigation, the court seal on this lawsuit document is proven forged. The law firm involved may also be implicated in joint criminal activity. Our personnel are already in coordination with airport police and will reach the scene within 3 minutes. Officer Vincent's long voice rang clearly through the departure hall over the telephone. The bespectacled lawyer Er's face instantly turned pale green. His legs started trembling uncontrollably. He instinctively stepped back, trying to shove the contract pack back into his briefcase. I stepped forward, snatched the stack of documents, and tore them slowly into 2 pieces before 4 in front of Victoria, then tossed them aside. Shreds of paper fell like snowflakes onto Victoria's expensive leather shoes. Forgery of official documents and on-site extortion. Your law licenses end today, I coldly told the 4 ashen-faced lawyers. At that moment, an armed contingent of airport SWAT officers along with several plainclothes economic police officers swiftly surged into the terminal. Major Gu, the lead plainclothes officer, saluted me. These individuals are suspected of forging state agency documents and extortion. Take them back for strict interrogation. I pointed to the unsteady lawyers and the terrified Victoria. What are you doing? I'm a shareholder of Dingsheng Estates. I'm related to the Gu family. Who are you to arrest me? Victoria screamed hysterically, but under the cold handcuffs and the stern gaze of the SWAT officers, she and her bodyguards were instantly subdued and dragged out of the terminal like dead dogs. Over the loudspeakers, the boarding announcement for my parents' flight began. I turned around, my face regaining its mildness. I handed the suitcase to my father. Dad. Mom. Board the plane. Text me when you land. Looking at me, my father's eyes flashed with pride as he nodded. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching my parents' silhouettes disappear at the end of the boarding corridor. Then, I turned around and strode purposefully toward the airport parking area. Sunlight slanted across the front windshield of the military off-road vehicle, painfully stinging my eyes. I firmly gripped the steering wheel as the vehicle sped along the highway toward the Special Operations Base at 120 kilometers per hour. The trees lining the road blurred into streaks of green rushing backward. Inside the cabin, only the low rumble of the engine and the faint hiss from the air vents were audible. Ding ding ding. Suddenly, the encrypted military phone on the dashboard erupted into a series of urgent incoming call tones. The screen flashed with a familiar name. Clara. She had been our family's longtime nanny for 15 years, always calm and steady. She would never have contacted me at this hour unless it was an emergency of critical severity. I pressed the Bluetooth answer button. Hello, Clara. Sir. Don't go back to the ancestral residence. Please. For God's sake, don't come home. Clara's voice trembled uncontrollably over the line, choked with outright terror. I could even hear her teeth chattering violently over the speaker. You have to listen to me connect now. Check the house security cams. Please. Just don't come back, Bip. The line was cut abruptly. The dial tone ring echoing in the car's silence felt like a physical assault. My eyes narrowed sharply. Without a moment's hesitation, I jacked the steering wheel with my right hand. The heavy off-road vehicle screeched onto the highway's emergency lane, leaving a trail of squealing rubber. It killed the engine and came to an automated stop right beside the road. I quickly unplugged my phone, pulled up my military encryption terminal, and connected remotely to the covert security camera I had secretly placed at the ancestral home the previous evening. 4 video feeds immediately lit up across the screen. I clicked onto the live feeds from the entrance to the basement and the master bedroom. The image confirmed my worst fears. Nearly half a dozen masked men clad in black tactical gear were now inside the long-abandoned ancestral home. Among them, leading the operation, stood Julian, the very man who was supposed to have been under police custody cooperating with an investigation. His face had twisted into a snarl as he held a high-precision, military-grade locator device, ordering his subordinates to violently pry open the hidden compartment inside my father's study. Work faster, Julian hissed through a high-fidelity eavesdropping receiver audible even over the line. Shove that box labeled classified into the concealed panel, and organize those forged border garrison deployment maps and offshore financial records on the table. As soon as that female military brat steps in, the National Security Administration and Military Commission's Discipline Committee will receive an anonymous tip. They'll catch her red-handed. 10 death sentences for treason and espionage won't be enough. In the video feed, one of his men carefully pushed a crate marked sensitive military information into the secret wall space. My eyes locked tightly onto the screen. Not only was Julian free, but cornered with no way out. He had allied himself with some underground faction to erect a frame-up label, high treason and military intelligence leaks, rendering me irredeemable and politically dead. At that moment, a sudden glint flashed across the rearview mirror inside the vehicle. I slowly raised my head upward to check the rearview mirror, about 50 meters behind my off-roader. A black armored sedan with no license plates and heavily tinted windows stood stationary in the emergency lane. The engine wasn't turned off. Exhaust steam traced in thin lines into the air, while inside, occupants clearly had laser-focused attention fixed on my license plate. They weren't waiting for me to return home, but to ensure I walked directly into their set trap. Slowly, I lowered my phone. A cold, sharp smile spread across my lips. I didn't panic. With my right hand, I pressed the button below the steering wheel, dispatching a direct transmission to the emergency channel of the Special Operations Base. This is Major Athena. I'm reporting a significant threat to national security and a serious breach of military intelligence. Suspects are currently committing crimes at the Gu family's ancestral home in the city suburbs. Request immediate activation of military-civilian police tripartite counterterrorism protocol for sector containment and encirclement of the target area. Base confirmed. Team Thunder has launched. Estimated arrival: 15 minutes. Came the crisp, decisive reply from the duty officer in the radio. I cut off the radio, shifted gears, and released the handbrake. The off-road vehicle let out a ferocious roar as it sharply turned around on the highway, speeding forward against the wind toward the old house. Seeing this, the black SUV behind immediately stomped on the accelerator and closely followed. The SUV abruptly screeched to a halt in a secluded grove of trees 200 meters away from the old residence. Before the black executive car following it could react, two military-grade armored SUVs already stationed at the intersection lunged out from either side with lightning speed, forming a shape that completely cut off its escape route. Several heavily armed special operations troops immediately jumped out, darkened gun muzzles piercing directly through the business car's windows. The informant inside the car, who'd been monitoring me, was dragged out and pinned face down in the mud with hands twisted behind his back before he could even send out an alarm. I opened the car door and stepped down, not casting a glance at the black sedan. I gripped a tactical folding shovel with one hand and, using the cover of night and undergrowth, slipped swiftly and silently back into the backyard of the old house like a phantom. The back door on the ground floor of the house stood slightly ajar, showing signs that the lock had been forcibly picked. I slipped inside sideways, making not a single sound. The air carried a faint haze of cigarette smoke and the scent of clay and sand dragged in by shoe soles. Hurry up. Has the surveillance jammer been switched on? After placing the case of new military explosives and the forged defense deployment map, we call national security right away and report them. The voice of Julian dropped low but couldn't hide excitement near the basement entrance. Rest assured, Mr. Julian, this time, even if this female bastard had 1,000 mouths, she couldn't explain herself, so long as the State Security Department and Military Procuratorate catch her red-handed with evidence on site. No matter how high her connections might be, she'll lose her skin for sure. Another male voice, slightly raspy, chimed in. I gripped the folding shovel tighter, pressed my body close to the wall, and quietly glided down the spiral staircase leading to the basement. In the spacious wine cellar area, 5 masked men were straining together to shove a heavy box marked with military classified seals into a hidden compartment. Julian stood to the side, holding a specially modified phone, proudly watching the stack of forged official documents, military deployment maps stamped with red headers, standing in the last shadow of the stairs. I calmly locked the folding shovel's clasp with a sharp click. It was not loud, but perfectly clear in the dead silence of the basement. Who's there? Julian whirled around as if stabbed by a needle. the phone in his hand nearly slipping to the ground. The 5 masked intruders likewise froze mid-action, looking toward the stairs. Mr. Julian. It seems the lesson from last night still hasn't taught you the basics of how to behave. I stepped out of the shadows in one stride, standing firmly before them, my face calm as I stared at Julian, whose face instantly turned deathly pale. Athena. You weren't supposed to be heading back to base. Julian recoiled in terror, stumbling backward and hitting a wine rack, the dull clatter of cork caps colliding in echo. Then, recovering himself, a venomous glint flashed in his eyes as he roared hysterically. What are you waiting for? She's alone. Finish her off. Stuff those contraband items into her clothes. The 5 masked men drew sharp military-grade short swords from their waists and converged toward me in a triangular formation. The leader lunged first, stabbing straight at my chest at lightning speed. I didn't move bodily, as his blade neared my chest to within 10 centimeters. My tactical folding shovel flashed out like lightning. The steel shovel face roared through the air and landed precisely on his wrist. Clink. Branching through bone, a scream of pain rose up, and the blade clattered down, using the momentum of the shovel. I twisted at the waist and unleashed a heavy sweeping blow that slammed hard into the second masked man's temple. He never even managed a groan, flew sideways and smashed into the wine rack, collapsing unconscious, head bleeding profusely. The remaining 3 men flinched in fear, their eyes showing momentary terror, yet still gritting their teeth and charging forward with swords held aloft, blocking both sides of my retreat. I snorted coldly, advancing instead of retreating, ducking low to avoid the leftward sweep, while the folding shovel in my hand instantly transformed into the deadliest shield, deflecting the rightward assassination. Then, I delivered a powerful kick to the inner side of his knee. With a crisp crack of bone displacement, he collapsed to one knee, and I swiftly jammed the edge of the folding shovel tightly against his neck, using his struggling body as a meat shield and slamming him hard into the last 2 masked assailants. All 3 rolled into a tangled heap, howling in agony. In under 2 minutes, all 5 seemingly tough professional enforcers lay writhing on the ground, incapacitated. Julian crumpled, his legs giving out beneath him, plopping down to the floor, clutching tightly onto the stack of forged documents. He stared at me in horror, as though gazing upon a demon crawled from hell. I slowly approached him, each step echoing like a death countdown with the clomp of my leather boots on concrete. I bent down, snatched the stack of forged deployment maps from his grip, roughly seized his collar, dragged him off the ground, and slammed him mercilessly into the cold basement wall. Julian fabricating military officers' crimes, smuggling dangerous military supplies, forging operational secrets. I stared into his face, twisted with raw terror, my voice as calm and cold as winter ice. Do you know how many times that would sentence you to death during wartime? No, it wasn't me. It was Chief Liu, the real boss behind Dingsheng Real Estate, told me to do this. They said once we take you down, your dad's shares will be ours, and all the land around the military zone will be ours too. Julian completely broke down, tears and snot streaming down his face as he screamed hysterically. I didn't utter a word, merely stared at him coldly. At that moment, above the basement, orderly and heavy bootsteps rapidly approached. Dozens of Special Forces operators clad in combat camouflage, equipped with assault rifles, flooded into the basement like a wave, the cold muzzles instantly locking onto everyone present. Reporting, Lieutenant. The scene is fully secured. All suspects and contraband have been contained. The Special Forces commander saluted, addressing me directly. I casually tossed the whimpering, limp Julian over to the team members behind me, leisurely adjusting my slightly disheveled collar. Get everyone onto the vehicles. Take these forged evidences too. We're heading to the police station to deliver a special present to that eager Section Chief Liu who can't wait to pick someone up. Inside the detention corridor of the police station, cold white fluorescent lamps cast onto the icy concrete floor, reflecting an oppressive, ghastly whiteness. The air was saturated with the sharp, suffocating smell of disinfectant and rusted iron. Julian was flanked by two heavily armed Special Forces soldiers, his hands cuffed behind his back, emitting desperate cries as he was roughly shoved deep into the most secured interrogation room. With my hands in my coat pockets, my leather boots stepped over the concrete, producing a dull yet steady echo as I followed at a deliberate pace. Stop right there. Which unit are you from? Who authorized you to bring someone here directly? A booming voice suddenly cut through the corridor. A portly man in casual clothes, backed by 4 officers, aggressively blocked our path at the corner, badge hanging at his chest clearly read, Director of the Provincial Special Task Unit Donald. Major Gu. Donald stopped 2 meters from me, his face stern, eyes scanning Julian before a short flicker of unease passed through his eyes. Swiftly regaining his arrogant composure, he barked, Julian is involved in a commercial dispute. Our unit is fully in charge. Release him now, or you'll be guilty of overstepping jurisdiction into local law enforcement. I will lodge charges of abuse of authority against you at the military procuratorate. The 4 officers behind him instantly stepped forward, forming a threatening semicircle blocking the interrogation room's doorway. Hands resting on their batons, I paused, locking eyes directly with Donald. I didn't show anger. Not even a hint of emotion stirred across my features. Lodged charges against me. I drew my right hand from my pocket, slowly producing from my inner coat a document sealed with a bright red military steel seal. I spread it open in front of Donald. Director Liu. Take a good look. This is the Joint Top-Level Counterespionage and Counterterrorism Investigation Authorization Letter signed between the Supreme Military Procuratorate and the National Security Bureau, in consideration of Julian's suspected illegal theft, forgery of military intelligence, and unauthorized smuggling of controlled military hazardous materials. This case has officially been elevated to a major national security threat, per regulations outlined in the defense law. The military holds absolute priority authority over investigations and detention during such cases. Donald's expression instantly turned as pale as whitewashed plaster the moment he recognized the red military seal. His Adam's apple writhed convulsively as he unconsciously stepped half a pace backward, yet still clenched his jaw defiantly. Athena, don't fling national security over me like that. Julian's just a businessman. How could he possibly access military intelligence? It's obvious your Gu family is settling personal scores. Fabricated evidence. Without a signed transfer order personally approved by the director of our provincial bureau. You're not getting anyone out here today. Is that so? I sneered, pulling out my phone and giving the screen a light tap. From the speaker outside the interrogation room, a high-fidelity recording began streaming without any noise interference. Director Liu, that female soldier has bitten the hook. Explosives and defense blueprints have already been stashed in her basement. You've secured things with the informant from national security. Right. As soon as she shows up, act immediately. Julian, listen carefully. Keep things clean. Once we pin the Gu family thoroughly for treason, we won't only have control over the 1,000 acres of military temporary use land granted to Changsheng Real Estate, but I can also mobilize provincial resources to clean up those 3 million you embezzled. After this is done, I deserve my fair share, every penny. Donald's distinctive raspy voice laced with greed echoed deafeningly through the silent detention corridor. The 4 officers frozen on the spot exchanged stunned glances. Their hands slowly dropped from their batons, some unconsciously distancing themselves from Donald. What had struck Donald felt like a lightning bolt. He stared intently at my phone, cold sweat dripping from his forehead like a waterfall. His lips trembled, unable to utter a coherent sentence. When did you? How is this possible? Last night, when you were conspiring with Julian at that private club. Did you really think your anti-eavesdropping equipment was advanced? I put my phone back in my pocket, took a step closer, and looked down at him from above. Donald, as a government official, you colluded with unscrupulous capitalists, encroached on national defense land, and even framed an active duty officer to cover up your crimes. Your police uniform ends today. At the end of the corridor. A series of hurried boot steps approached rapidly. Inspectors from the police department and 2 agents in black uniforms from the National Security Bureau walked forward with stern faces, flashing arrest warrants directly at Donald under his desperate gaze. Donald, you are suspected of serious discipline violations, criminal activity, and endangering national security. Come with us. Cold handcuffs instantly locked Donald's plump wrists. His legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the ground, dragged away by the 2 security agents like a dead dog. I turned around and looked at Julian in the interrogation room, his face ashen and trembling. Julian, Donald is done. How long do you think the real estate tycoon behind you will last? I coldly dropped these words and turned, walking out without looking back. Inside the private club Tingtao Pavilion perched atop a hill on the city's outskirts, the sound of an ancient guqin echoed melodiously, while musky fragrance of expensive agarwood incense filled the air. In the topmost, most luxurious VIP room, huge floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the city's nighttime panorama in full vista. Victor, the city's largest private real estate tycoon and the de facto leader of Dingsheng Real Estate, sat calmly on a Wangwali wooden armchair, slowly swirling a glass of expensive red wine. Behind him stood 8 professional bodyguards in black suits, their sharp expressions betraying poise and alertness. Bang! The double doors carved from rare purple sandalwood were kicked open with force, the heavy panels slamming hard against the sidewalls and causing a deafening crash. The guqin music halted abruptly. I stepped into the room in spotless combat boots, my black military uniform making my posture as upright as a pine tree. 8 bodyguards immediately changed their expressions, instantly spreading out into a fan formation, hands reaching for their waists, locking me in place with murderous glares. Victor remained still. He took a light sip of wine, looked at me, and smiled with the arrogance and mockery typical of someone at the top. Major Gu, he said, I've long heard of you. You arrived uninvited tonight. Even broke down my door. Isn't that a bit disrespectful of the rules? Rules. I walked straight toward the opposite end of the long tea table, planted my hands firmly on the tabletop, and looked down at him with contempt. Without wasting a single word, I flicked out my right hand, dumping a thick stack of top-secret documents stamped with the military emblem and National Security Agency seal directly beside his wine glass. Victor, take a look at these. These are the illegal ledgers showing Dingsheng Real Estate transferring vast sums of funds overseas via shell companies over the past 5 years. And look here, definitive proof that your company illegally occupied the restricted military radar station zone in the northern suburbs and conducted unauthorized surveying of military restricted area terrain. My voice was icy, echoing throughout the vast room. Victor glanced at the documents, his eyelid twitching slightly, but swiftly regained his composure. He set down his wine glass, clasped his fingers behind his head, leaned back, and burst into laughter. Major Gu, you are indeed clever and resourceful. Even those 2 idiots, Donald and Julian, couldn't escape your grasp. But don't forget you're dealing with a major taxpayer of this city. You're facing a man with tens of thousands of employees under my banner, and even greater political connections beyond your imagination. With just one word from me, everything you've brought today, your so-called conclusive evidence, will disappear completely from every single system by tomorrow. He leaned forward slightly, pulling out a blank check from his inner pocket and pushing it across the table toward me. 80 million. You simply leave these documents behind, and today's incident will be treated as never happened. From now on, you and your parents can live like royalty abroad. Major, trying to oppose capital like ours, your meager military salary and your so-called principles are utterly worthless. Capital, I sneered, straightened up, and slowly placed my hand on my waist. The 8 bodyguards turned livid an instant later. They drew their collapsible batons and electric shockers, simultaneously stepping forward, ready to shoot or kill me the moment I made a false move. Ignoring them, I unslung a military-grade high-band positioning terminal directly linked to satellite surveillance mounted at my waist. On its screen, a flashing red button emitted a sinister glow. Victor. I stared at him, speaking slowly and deliberately. Do you know who you're facing? Do you really think this is a simple commercial crime or some petty local feud? For the moment you first engaged in selling military survey data to foreign agents, what you faced was already the highest level and most devastating blow from national security. Right before his eyes, I slammed the red button with the thumb of my right hand. Boom. At nearly the exact same instant I pressed the button, enormous helicopter rotor sounds suddenly roared outside the club. Intense searchlight beams instantly pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding the entire private booth with brightness as bright as noon. Immediately after, the blast-proof glass shattered with a deafening crash. More than a dozen national security agents in black tactical gear, night vision goggles, and wielding Type 95 assault rifles, along with elite soldiers from the military, descended like celestial warriors, rappelling in through the window in an instant. National security operation. Put your hands on your head. Get down on your knees. Amid the sharp warning shouts, the 8 bodyguards barely had time to resist before being knocked down forcefully by gunstock from the special forces, instantly locked with rigid alloy handcuffs. Victor's wineglass slipped from his hand, smashing into pieces on the expensive carpet, the crimson liquid spreading like his rapidly collapsing business empire. Shaking all over, he stood up, his face deathly pale as he stared at me and the special soldiers pointing guns straight at his forehead. Victor, your massive funds were globally frozen 10 minutes ago by China's State Administration of Foreign Exchange and Military Procuratorate. Those so-called connections behind you are probably currently being summoned for discussion by the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. I walked over, picked up the blank check, tore it into shreds, then casually tossed the paper scraps onto his face. Your capital, as of today, is thoroughly bankrupt. Take him away. Turning around, I strode out of the booth, leaving behind chaos and Victor's desperate screams echoing in the background. Inside the multimedia center of the Military Region News Office, countless LCD display walls pulsated with dense streams of data and real-time public opinion monitoring charts. On the screens, several unscrupulous self-media outlets affiliated with peak real estate were wildly trending. Fabricated rumors such as active officer forcibly seizing shares in a private enterprise, and Major Athena abusing privileges to violently resist law enforcement and persecute family members were being aggressively promoted through paid traffic, skyrocketing in at an exponential rate. The comment sections were flooded with accusations from uninformed netizens. Unknown forces, after failing to launch a real-world counterattack, now sought to completely discredit my uniform through public opinion. I stood rigidly behind the press conference podium, my mess dress adorned with the rank insignia of Major gleaming under the spotlight. Not a trace of makeup was visible. My gaze calm and steely as I faced the dozens of media journalists surrounding me, their cameras and microphones trained on me, flashes blinking continuously, yet I betrayed not the slightest hint of unease. Major Gu, regarding online allegations accusing you of using your military position to pressure relatives into transferring trust assets, and of employing violence to detain peak real estate employees. How do you respond? One journalist, apparently bought and paid for, struck first with sharp, inflammatory words, as if about to shove his microphone directly in my face. I did not respond to his question. Instead, I raised my right hand and calmly pressed a button on the nearby multimedia control panel. Everyone needs to see the facts right here, I said. Behind me, the 100-inch ultra-clear LED screen instantly lit up. The footage began with ultra-high-definition surveillance video showing Julian and several masked figures surreptitiously prying open a secret room in my parents' old residence, stuffing dangerous goods sealed with military-sensitive labels and forged defense layouts into hidden compartments. The high-fidelity audio, transmitted through the center's surround sound system, clearly played Julian's confession admitting he was instructed by Victor plotting a frame-up against an active military officer for treason and espionage. The entire press hall gasped collectively, falling into an eerie, deathly silence. Immediately afterward, the screen switched. An authoritative proclamation stamped jointly by the National Security Agency, the Supreme Military Procuratorate, and the Provincial Public Security Department's Economic Investigation Task Force stood clearly displayed. The statement detailed Victor and his shadowed interest group's complete chain of evidence involving national security endangerment, illegal occupation of defense land, money laundering through overseas shell companies, and hiring assailants to harm individuals. Every transaction record, each fingerprint forensic evidence, each comparison of falsified official documents, all were presented in meticulous, logically closed sequences, laid out piece by piece before all present. These are the so-called acts of violent resistance to law enforcement, I declared, locking eyes directly into every camera lens below me. My voice remained low, but carried the inherent authority and penetrating power unique to officers, on the issue of national security and the inviolable bottom line of the law. No capital can act above the law. Any attempt to fabricate rumors through public opinion to smear our defense forces or conceal criminal acts becomes, under ironclad evidence, nothing but the final flailing of insignificant clowns. The journalist who had challenged me in front was instantly drained of color. Frightened and disheveled, he quickly retreated back into the crowd. On the surrounding display walls, the previously sharply climbing metrics of negative public sentiment plummeted dramatically in an instant. Replacing them now were nationwide calls to outrage against Peak Real Estate and Victor's entire interest group. Report: Major shares of Peak Real Estate, under One Group, have hit the daily limit drop within 5 minutes, triggering circuit breakers. The multimedia technician in charge of data monitoring reported urgently. Report: self-media accounts linked to Victor have been fully banned by the Cyberspace Administration of China. Responsible persons are currently being lawfully summoned by local police. From behind the podium, I stepped forward slowly and adjusted my sharp military appearance with a practiced hand. The press briefing concludes here. The facts have been clarified. As for the rest, see you in court. With that, I strode out of the multimedia center with firm steps. In the third courtroom of the City Intermediate People's Court, the air hung thick enough almost to solidify, because this case involved state secrets and military classified information. Police cordons surrounded the building and the doors were tightly shut. Conducting a closed hearing, seated side by side in the defendant's stand were Victor, Julian, and Donald. Just in a few days, Victor, once an arrogant real estate tycoon, now had completely grizzled hair and sunken eyes. Julian slumped lifelessly in his chair, too fearful even to raise his head. Donald stared rigidly at the ground, his shoulders occasionally quivering. Behind them stood the defense team composed of 4 of the country's top-tier lawyers. Presiding judge. Our team holds that the videos and audio recordings submitted by the military prosecutor accusing my clients of occupying military reserve land and scheming to obtain state secrets were obtained through means violating local judicial procedures. The lead defense attorney stood up, adjusting his glasses as he launched a sharp final rebuttal. As a party directly involved in this case, Captain Gu's privately installed surveillance equipment violates established regulations, and thus the recorded evidence cannot serve as legal proof against my clients for alleged crimes endangering national security. We move to suppress this illegally obtained evidence and request release of the assets of the involved companies. Hearing these words, Victor flashed a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes, locking gaze upon the jury bench. Bang! The courtroom doors were thrust open. I marched in wearing my sharp lieutenant's service peacetime combat uniform. My leather boots echoed with crisp, resolute rhythm across the polished marble floor. As the primary witness and military prosecutor representative in this case, I slowly strode toward the witness stand. Collecting my composure, I paid no mind to the incendiary glares of the defense counsel. Opening my military issue briefcase, I pulled out a top-secret document jointly signed by the Supreme Military Procuratorate and the Ministry of State Security. Thrusting it forward for viewing by the bench, presiding judge, I stated coolly, each word dropping with gravitas, the defense's claims regarding irregularities in military investigation procedures are entirely baseless, according to the defense law and anti-spying law. In cases of significant emergencies endangering national security or revealing military secrets, the Military Special Operations Anti-Spying Division has the authority to activate the top-level emergency investigation protocol. What I hold in hand is a post-incident emergency investigation authorization letter specifically approved by the Supreme Military Procuratorate on the day of the CASA's initiation, strictly in accordance with legal procedures. I handed the document over. This means that from the very first second, every surveillance recording, call recording, and on-site tracking operation in this case has been carried out under legitimate authorization from the country's highest national security agencies. Each link in the evidentiary chain is perfectly closed and faultless. On the courtroom's large electronic screen, Victor's final funds transfer audit reports and his correspondence with suspected foreign spies began scrolling once again. Among those email threads, the prices of North Suburb Military Restricted Zone survey maps were clearly marked. Observing the evidence on screen, each IP address and transaction number precise to the unit, Victor's defense attorney turned white as a sheet, his mouth flapping open a few times before he slumped back into his chair. Defeated. At the defendant's table, Victor convulsed violently. All remaining breath seemed to be sucked from his body. He collapsed totally into his chair, his eyes losing all vitality. Julian screamed outright in terror, pointing at Victor and shouting, "He forced me. He ordered me." The explosives and defense blueprints were all given by him. I was helpless. Presiding judge, I am turning state's evidence. I beg you, please show mercy. Silence. The presiding judge struck his gavel heavily. Standing on the witness stand, I looked down upon these criminals trembling before the rule of law and the dignity of our nation. There was no trace of sympathy on my face, only the cold judgment befitting justice. All rise. Sentence is now being passed. With the stark voice of the presiding judge, justice delivered on schedule. Victor was sentenced to life imprisonment for espionage, endangering national security, and bribery, with lifelong deprivation of political rights and complete confiscation of personal property. Donald was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment for official crimes, sheltering, and endangering national security. Julian was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for false accusation and illegal transportation of hazardous goods. The gavel fell, and the dust settled. I straightened my military cap, turned around, and strode out of the courtroom amidst cries and the clanging sounds of handcuffs on the floor. At noon in August, the sun blazed like great fire across the red earth runway. On the vast Special Operations training ground, heat waves shimmered visibly in the air. From afar, the shooting range intermittently echoed with the thunderous rumble of heavy machine guns firing, mingled with the deafening shouts of special operators during hand-to-hand combat drills. I put on camouflage combat uniform, slightly bleached from washing, secured a multifunctional tactical belt at my waist, and strapped on high-top tactical boots. I stood straight alongside the command platform at the training ground's edge, beads of sweat sliding down my cheeks and neck, dropping onto the scorching ground, evaporating instantly, yet my body remained rigid as a spear, not moving the slightest millimeter. Ding dong. A short notification chime came from my military encrypted phone in my pocket. I raised my right hand, squinted in the sunlight, and unlocked the screen. It was a photo sent by my father, a warm indoor sunroom of an overseas rehabilitation center where he and my mother were holding cups of tea with soft smiles, with a sparkling blue lake as their backdrop. Beneath the photo was a brief text message. "Child, we have settled safely. We've seen what's happening back home. You've done excellently. I live up to being a daughter of the Gu family and a true soldier. Take care of yourself and return to duty with peace of mind." Gazing at my parents' calm and content smiles in the photo, a faint yet infinitely relaxed smile finally surfaced at the corner of my lips. I didn't reply. I locked the phone screen and casually tucked it into my tactical pocket, zipping it shut. Senior Lieutenant Gu. A crisp voice rang out behind me. The battalion commander of the base's Special Operations Force arrived, followed by 2 company commanders. Marching forward in unison, they came to a stop 2 meters away, rendering an impeccably sharp military salute. Reporting, Senior Lieutenant. The prepositioning for the multi-region joint military exercise Thunder 2026 is fully complete. 1st and 2nd Special Operations Companies are assembled, all 216 personnel accounted for. Please deliver your instructions. I turned around, facing the energetic, expertly equipped Special Operations Unit Squad. Under the sunlight, the steel helmets and rifle barrels of over 200 special operators flashed with cold, solemn brilliance. Slowly, I raised my right hand and gave a resolute, solemn military saluteto, my comrades. To this military camp I had pledged my life to protect, and to the homeland far away, now finally returning to peace. Comrades, board the vehicles, advance. Yes. 200 voices roared in unison, thundering toward the sky. The rumbling roar of armored vehicles again pierced the silence of the wilderness. I turned around, pulled open the car door, stepped onto the lead command off-roader in one stride, and charged forward into the sweltering heat toward a new battlefield. Outside chapter. The iron gate of the special prison slammed shut behind me with a deafening metallic creak. The air in here was several degrees colder than outside, laced with a thick, stubborn smell of rust and disinfectant. Wearing a plain uniform devoid of any insignia, my leather boots echoed with a rhythmic, chilling monotony along the dull, unpolished cement corridor. Sunlight outside the iron-barred window was sliced by thick steel rods into strips of blinding white shards, casting rectangles of light onto the iron chair welded to the floor at the center of the visiting room. Bring in prisoner Victor. I sat down across a double layer of bulletproof glass, picked up a worn black microphone from the side table, and spoke in a calm, even tone. 2 minutes later, the heavy dragging of chains resounded through the empty space. A figure in gray prison uniform, shackled with handcuffs and leg irons, stumbled forward under escort from 2 guards, collapsing shakily into the iron chair, the cuffs clattering sharply against the bars. This was Victor, the once powerful real estate tycoon who ruled the city with an iron fist, worth billions, now bald-headed, his scrawny scalp dotted with age spots. His cheeks were deeply sunken, his formerly sharp, fierce eyes now clouded and lifeless, corners caked with dried tears. He trembled as he thrust forward thin, bony fingers, struggling to grasp the receiver and press it to his ear. Lieutenant Gu. Athena. His voice was as abrasive as 2 pieces of sandpaper rasping against each other, layered with the nauseating despair of a dying man. Vice President Juan. Getting used to life imprisonment here at special detention. Still adapting. I reclined in my chair, face expressionless, voice devoid of any emotion. You've won. Peak Property has entered bankruptcy liquidation. All overseas trusts, equity holdings, even the trust fund I set up for my son, for all of them. Your military authorities and state security have frozen everything. Victor glared at me, his clouded eyes suddenly lighting up with a vicious, feral hatred. But I haven't lost everything yet. Athena. Do you really believe imprisoning us means that your Gu family can rest easy? Do you have any idea just how deep the waters are beneath that military land in the northern suburbs? The number of eyes watching it goes beyond just me. Victor. He lunged forward suddenly, his aged face almost slamming against the bulletproof glass, veins protruding from his temples, his shackles clanging wildly against the iron bars. Those overseas foundations you mentioned, the people still hidden inside the province, neither of them will let you go, let alone your parents. The moment you step foot abroad, or your parents even show up overseas, they'll find 100 ways to make them vanish without a trace. He grinned maniacally, revealing a mouthful of yellowed, broken teeth. Laughter dripping with madness and desperation. I observed his hysterical performance without even lifting my eyelids. Slowly, I straightened my posture, placed my right hand firmly on the counter in front of the glass, looming over him with absolute control. Victor, did you really think I'm here today to listen to your pathetic groveling or to endure your empty threats that carry no real danger? I sneered coldly, pulling from the inner pocket of my coat a top-secret report freshly stamped by the security division. I didn't place the document flat against the glass. Instead, I lightly tapped my fingertip along its surface. Those so-called overseas foundations you keep mentioning were dismantled jointly by Interpol and our national security agencies 3 days ago on suspicion of funding terrorist activities and transnational espionage. 9 out of their 11 CRET communication points in the Asia-Pacific region have already been eliminated by our Special Operations Base in coordination with state security. Victor's grin froze on his face at that moment, the muscles around his eyes twitching violently. And as for those provincial figures you still think remain hidden, with meticulous calm, I slid the report back into my pocket, a cold, chilling smirk curling at the corner of my lips. At 6 o'clock this morning, the Provincial Commission for Discipline Inspection and the National Supervisory Commission jointly issued the double regulation decision, including Deputy Director Tang, the very official who had promoted Donald back then. A total of 17 public officials have now all signed documents in the interrogation room. Among them, 3 individuals, seeking to diminish their sentences through meritorious service, have already recounted in full detail every piece of information they know about your contacts with foreign forces. Victor began trembling violently. The last flicker of madness in his cloudy eyes was extinguished in an instant and replaced with an abyssal terror. No, that's impossible. How could they discover it so quickly? He muttered, nearly dropping the black handset. Victor, standing before national security and the unyielding fist of military police. Your self-proclaimed networks of connections are nothing more than a rotten fishing net that tears apart with just one tug. I stood up, looking down at him, and slowly put the handset back to my ear, speaking clearly and slowly. I've come today only to personally inform you one thing: every illegal account of your son overseas has just been completely deactivated half an hour ago. He has been arrested by the local police on money laundering suspicion and will soon be extradited back to the country. Your Juan family is calm, completely finished. Athena, you madwoman, you'll be cursed and die a miserable death. Victor completely collapsed. He threw down the handset, ignoring the shackles binding his limbs, frantically lunging at the bulletproof glass. His face contorted like that of a beast cornered into total madness. 2 prison guards instantly stepped forward, skillfully pinning his arms behind his back and pressing him forcefully into the iron chair. Without sparing him another glance, I hung up the handset, turned around, and walked briskly out of the visitation room. The armored door behind me shut once again, completely isolating his desperate scream from the other side. 10 minutes later, I opened the door of my heavily armored military SUV parked outside the special detention facility and stepped into the driver's seat. The sunlight outside was glaringly bright. I lowered the sun visor, started the engine, and the menacing SUV let out a low growl, inching onto the highway back to base. The encrypted military phone on the dashboard lit up again. On the screen was a real-time surveillance screenshot sent by our military district security officer, an image of a seaside villa on the opposite side of the world, surrounded by 8 plainclothes personnel from our external security team, maintaining protective stances along the red brick promenade where my parents were strolling. There, the wind was calm, the sunshine warm. I my gaze and placed my phone onto the cup holder beside me. I slammed my right foot down on the accelerator. The SUV transformed into a black streak of lightning on the highway, cutting through the heat waves, racing ahead toward the red flag flying proudly at the horizon. All storms have now been severed by my own hands.